And you will find that these characters are also being shown here, but with their own limitations, their own frailties, their own flaws. They are being shown. They're not perfect individuals. Now the prologue. This prologue has been attributed to David Garrick, a very popular, he's an squire, and he's a very popular actor during the time of Oliver Goldsmith. So this prologue has been attributed to him. It's generally that the prologues are performed or read out loud by popular characters so that people pay attention and take the message seriously. Now, what is the premise of the prologue, which we need to talk about? Here, Dr. Goldsmith expresses his fear of what? The vanishing comic arts. With the sentimental comedies coming into form and becoming more popular, he was worried that the comedy as English comedy as a form might lose its importance, its significance. So, and it might slowly vanish because people were already getting bored with the kind of sentimental comedies which were being shown. And he believed that comedy is meant to entertain, and it should have those qualities rather than being serious and being more reasonable. So you'll find a little bit of absurdity in his place. So the premise of the prologue that we're talking about, wherein Dr. Goldsmith is worried about the vanishing comic arts that is expressed, and he says that She Stoops to Conquer as a play will act as a medicine that will save the comic arts. Now, what are the explicit purpose of the play? Let's see. The main purpose of the playwright when he writes a comedy has to make the audience laugh. And Oliver Goldsmith has succeeded in his attempt, as he mentions in his prologue, as you think it's a voice of the author, then of the playwright, then it says that the audience should laugh. The play should make them laugh. Now, the speaker is in a very mourning state here. Why? Because he's worried about the dying comic art. It mirrors the trend in the theatre. Now, it reflects the trend that were existing. A lot of sentimental comedies were being shown and people were worried. And slowly people would stop going to watch a comedy because they were getting so boring. Therefore, writers like Oliver Goldsmith, who were trying to usher in the change. This is all about Oliver Goldsmith, his play, and how the prologue sets the mood, the tone of the play. We come to the play, as I mentioned earlier. This play has two titles. She Stoops to Conquer is the most popular title, and the other one is The Mistakes of a Knight. And when we look at the titles, we know, and as we read the play, we know that they're very appropriate titles, both of them. But when we talk about She Stoops to Conquer, here she stands for Kate Hardcastle, the central character, a female lead of the play, as you can call, who is in love with Marlowe, and how she stoops to the level of a lowly rank of a barmaid in order to win Marlowe's heart, and how she succeeds by doing so. Therefore, it's a very appropriate title. At the same time, when we look at the other title, The Mistakes of a Knight, it's the first time that when Marlowe and Hastings come to visit Hardcastle's house, and they wish to know the directions, and they are being misled by Tony Lumpkin, who sends them to the house of Mr. and Mrs. Hardcastle and asks them to stay there as it's an inn. Now, that's the mistake that they make because they are being misled by Tony Lumpkin. These two people go there and go to Mr. and Mrs. Hardcastle's mansion thinking that it's an inn, and that's the first mistake that they make. They think that Mr. Hardcastle is an innkeeper. Marlowe believes that Kate is a barmaid, and these are the mistakes that they make. And one mistake leads to the other, and it continues. It's a very interesting play. We have 5 acts in it, and as we will be looking at each and every act and how the story moves ahead. See the ending as well as the opening. Both are very, very important, especially when we talk about the opening scene. It's the Mr. and Mrs. Hardcastle's house, where Mr. and Mrs. Hardcastle, they are sitting and talking about the country life and the life in the city. Mrs. Hardcastle wants to go to Paris, and she's more materialistic. She is more interested in fashion, whereas Mr. Hardcastle is a total contradiction of what Mrs. Hardcastle is. So they're two opposite characters here. So the play opens at Mr. Hardcastle's house, where husband and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Hardcastle, are having a talk. And they are expecting Marlowe's arrival. Young Marlowe is the son of Sir Charles Marlowe. Sir Charles Marlowe is a very close friend of Mr. Hardcastle. Young Marlowe is a prospective suitor to Mr. Hardcastle's daughter, Kate Hardcastle. So they are expecting the arrival of young Marlowe. That's how, and they're discussing about all that. So any play, when we look at it, the opening and the ending, they are important, because generally for students like you will have to prepare it, keeping in mind that short note kind of questions could be asked on this. When we look at the setting in any play, any kind of fictional work, it's not just characters, it's not just the tone of the tenor of the play, but it's also the setting, which is very, very important. Now, Oliver Goldsmith has created a very interesting fictional setting here, and he has named it Quagmire Marsh. So this is for the first time. There's no such place in London and or in England, and he comes out with this Quagmire Marsh as a very interesting setting to this play. Marlowe and Hastings are misled by Tony. As I said, that's how the play begins. We look at the opening of the play. As you know, Mr. and Mrs. Hardcastle's house, it resembles an inn because it's a very old mansion. And so when Tony Lumpkin tries to fool Marlowe and Hastings, they are easily fooled because of the look of the mansion. They're waiting for Marlowe's arrival, as I mentioned, and Marlowe is a prospective suitor for Kate. Tony Lumpkin is the one who plays a prank on Hastings and Marlowe. This is how the play opens. It's a very interesting and amusing opening. Now, the setting here is Hardcastle's mansion, but as Oliver Goldsmith has adhered to the unity of place, you will find that it's either in the mansion or it's somewhere around the mansion that the entire play takes place. So this mansion in the English countryside, it's about 60 miles away from London. Young Marlowe and Hastings have come from London. They've come from the city, and they're here in this countryside visiting Hardcastle's mansion. As I mentioned earlier, the mansion resembles an inn. There's a brief episode before they reach the inn, and that is at an ale house. where the ale house is known as, it's a nearby tavern where it is known as the Three Pigeons Ale House. A brief episode where they happen to meet Hastings, and Marlowe happen to meet Tony Lumpkin, who gives them the direction to the inn, which happens to be Tony Lumpkin's house. There are a range of characters. First, let me introduce just the characters that you have. Then we go and I'll try and describe each and every character and their special feature. Mr. Hardcastle is there, Mrs. Hardcastle, Kate Hardcastle, Constance Neville is the niece of Mrs. Hardcastle, who has inherited a lot of property, and Mrs. Hardcastle wishes that she marries her son by first marriage, Tony Lumpkin, so that the property doesn't go outside. Now, Mr. Hardcastle, Hastings and Marlowe are the two other characters that you have. Then Sir Charles Marlowe is there. Then you have few people who happen to meet, who are introduced here when Mr. and Mrs. Mr. Hastings and Marlowe come to the ale house where they happen to meet few people. So they are all minor characters. We'll talk about them, but they are not very important characters. Let's come to Mr. Hardcastle, a middle-aged gentleman. And as I told you earlier, he is so different from his wife. He prefers a very simple rural life. And he is very fond of old-fashioned manners, customs. And therefore, he wishes that his daughter also wears simple dresses. She doesn't wear fashionable clothes. But Kate is very fond of fashionable clothes, but she's also very fond of her dad, her father. So she wants to keep her father happy. So she decides that in the morning she'll wear all the fashionable clothes that she's fond of, and in the evening she will keep her father happy by wearing those old-fashioned clothes. So this is a very old-fashioned man who likes all kind of things that are old, the rural life, the simple life, the old-fashioned manners, customs, to the trendy and pretentious ways of upper-class London. The upper class of London, who are believed to be very pretentious, very stylish, and not genuine people. That's what Mr. Hardcastle believes. So he's totally against that kind of a culture. Mrs. Dorothy Hardcastle. She's the wife of Mr. Hardcastle. As I mentioned earlier, she yearns for a lavish life, highly fashionable life. She that's a wish list, wishes to visit Paris. She values material possessions. That's the reason why she insists that her son, Tony Lumpkin, marries her niece, Miss Neville Constance, who has inherited some property from her ancestors. Now, Tony is not the biological son of Mr. Hardcastle. Tony Lumpkin is a son of Mrs. Dorothy Hardcastle from her first marriage. Now, Constance Neville is a niece with whom Mrs. Hardcastle schemes to get her married to Tony because, as I said, Neville has inherited some property. She's a very she pampers her son and spoils her son. So that's how, right from the beginning, we know that Tony Lumpkin is not well-bred. He does not talk the kind of polished or refined language. He's not able to read the letter. So there's another incident that takes place. So he's not very good at reading, writing. He's not a refined gentleman, though he belongs to a family of upper class, right? Because he's pampered and he's spoiled by his mother, Mrs. Hardcastle. a very pivotal character, that is Marlowe. We call him young Marlowe because of the senior Marlowe, Marlowe's father, who's Sir Charles Marlowe. Now Marlowe, he comes to the country from London to woo Kate Hardcastle. He's extremely shy, and you'll find a dual personality in his character. He's shy with refined young ladies, with educated, polished, refined young ladies. He's extremely shy, but at the same time, he's very comfortable. He's at ease with women of humble background and working class. And this is the distinctive characteristic of this promising young man, which Oliver Goldsmith has used very intelligently. Oliver Goldsmith uses this character to satirize the England's preoccupation with overemphasis on class distinctions. Like in India, we have casteism. We believe in different castes, upper caste and lower caste. In England, you'll find that there is this class distinctions. And this is what he wanted to highlight through this play. And there's too much of overemphasis on class distinctions. And he wanted to show this frailties of human society. And that's one reason why he has tried to portray his characters in this particular fashion. Now, some of the redeeming qualities of Marlowe makes him a likable character. Though there are a lot of foibles and frailties in his character, but still you like this character for some reason. Now, he becomes a victim of a practical joke that is played first by Tony Lumpkin, and later on, Kate Hardcastle also tries to keep him in the dark, not telling him that she is the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Hardcastle. Instead, she acts as a barmaid and confuses him further. So you'll find that there is a case of mistaken identity in this play. We come to the most prominent female character of this play,